Okay, it's recording now, and I can edit off, whatever excess video we have later. So
Yeah.
hopefully this will get some discussion started. The other video that I shared, when I took the video of the debate that I did before on YouTube, that actually has a lot of views. So hopefully I can share this using the same kind of language on there.
Yeah.
So first, we'll start out with who you are, and then who I am, and then we'll start through the topics.
Okay. Sounds
Sound good?
Yeah. So I am Jacob Deist. I am an ordained Presbyterian minister and formerly served the church where Isaiah and his wife Mary attend, and William, and currently live in Athens, Georgia.
Okay, so I'm Isaiah Reed. I'm a Deist, which is what brings up a lot of these discussions. And I don't really know what to say. I'm in North Carolina, in McDowell County, North Carolina. Work for the Department of Environmental Quality. So let's try to hammer out some topics here.
Yeah.
All right. So the first one is, and a good way to, I think, bring it up is we've got this discussion group on Facebook, which has got a lot of people in it, and then some that come in and bounced out and everything. The idea of discussing religion, theology, and things like that is something a lot of people really, it seems like, really want to do, but I don't know if they get uncomfortable with it or if they get just turned off by the idea that somebody doesn't agree or what. So when it comes to discussing this stuff with people, the only people that I have a real hard time discussing it with, and I've sort of vowed I would never actually have a debate with, would be a presuppositionalist, right? Because it's arguing with the presuppositionalist is what is Thomas Paine would refer to it as administering medicine to the dead, right? You're not going to get anywhere. They've already, I mean, it's. I heard once basically the argument was, you're not saying what I believe, so you're wrong. I mean, it was as absurd as that. But so what do you think? Why do you think we have such trouble getting people to discuss religion and getting people to actually be active in that group?
Yeah, so for starters, I do think that faith can be an intensely private thing. And so that can feed into, it's almost like talking about politics, where, it can change the way that people perceive you. And so sometimes it's better to just not talk about it. The other thing, and this is certainly not a new thing, but it does seem to be, or at least I seem to be hyper aware of it currently, is we live in a deeply polarized society, and there isn't really a whole lot of middle ground. And those who are in the middle end up getting attacked by both sides.
So in this situation, say we're having a discussion, a deist and a theist, what would be both sides of this? Well, who would condemn the conversation here?
I think that you're more likely to have the theist condemn the conversation. I do have a little bit of a hot take on that if you're ready to move into that topic. I actually think that deism is a subset of theism.
I would be the reverse. So this definitely would be an interesting conversation.
So here's my rationale. If you look at the definitions of theism and deism, they both start with the words "a belief in at least one higher being." Deism takes it a step further usually by saying that that higher being does not take an active role in creation. Is that correct?
So I would say the reverse. I would say that both
Okay.
the deist and the theist take the position that the language Thomas Paine uses, sort of the deist takes the position that there is a first cause to the universe. And
Okay.
by definition, sort of the idea of a first cause would have to be a God. So that's where a lot of it's rooted at. But I would say that once both make the step that there's a God, and then the theist makes a step further and says that that God intervenes.
Ah,
You
okay.
see, so it's a little bit. In other words, there's nothing about what I believe that you don't.
Right.
So, because the extent
Yeah, because
of what you
a
believe is,
lot of, especially with Christianity, a lot of our early development of our theology is rooted in the idea of the philosophical first mover or unmoved God. So I think we would find a lot of common ground there.
right.
Yeah. So that's interesting, and I see the point that from the deist perspective, the unmoved God would not take part in creation.
Well, not necessarily that. It's not like the claim that he would not. It's
Right.
just that no one's proven that he does.
Okay.
So, in other words, if there's two claims, God doesn't intervene in the universe, and the other claim is that he does, which one of the two requires proof?
Ah, okay. So, yeah, the I guess the theistic claim would require some sort of proof
Right.
if that is something that you deem to be necessary.
So, in other words, like if I say the sum of my belief as a deist is that there was an uncaused first cause to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing. That's all of
Okay.
deism. And it's sort of because I'm on a sort of Paine style, the way Thomas Paine described it. That method of thinking is the type of deism that I arrive at, and he says that the only way to describe God would be to say that he's the first cause. So if someone said the theist, to me it seems like the theist moves beyond that and says not only is there a first cause to the universe, but there's also he intervenes. He's also come down and spoke with people. He takes an issue with what people have eaten and what day they eat it and all that kind of that's the further claim,
or what they didn't eat.
right, or what they didn't eat, right, yeah, or take sides in wars.
Yeah.
I think Hitchens put it, he said it takes an issue with who you sleep with and in what position. So that's the further claim, is that deism makes a claim that there is an uncaused first cause, there's a God, there's a creator.
Yeah.
And then theism also makes that same step. But then theism goes beyond that and claims that he also intervenes. He's given a revelation. He's taken an interest in this particular planet. And as a deist, there's no evidence to conclude that. So that's why that's where I come up. That's where I hit a wall, is making that step from deism to theism.
Right. And I do think this is where, and I am not a Christian apologist, but I do think this is where you would normally hear in the argument the proof that you're looking for is the person of Jesus Christ. That is, if you accept that as true, Christ is proof of God's intervention into creation.
Just the existence of Jesus, or the truth of the Bible story?
I think it requires accepting as true that Christ is, as Christianity has traditionally claimed, to be 100% human and 100% divine.
So he's 200% total.
No.
Okay, so as a deist, you get to that point and you would say, if someone says, well, the evidence is in Jesus, I don't have any issue believing that Jesus existed, right? I don't see any issue. There's obviously something that happened. So it seems like throughout history there can be a phenomenon of sort of legendary stories that are attached to a particular person or a hero or whoever it is. So for me, there would need to be some sort of reason to conclude that Jesus was more than a person that existed that started a religion or that changed the existing religion or that led a group of people or that, served as a sort of a blame person, that exists all of a sudden, somebody to attribute all these prophecies to and everything. But, well, this person existed. He also did this, and he also, it seems like a lot of those things could be added on as it goes. There's one, it's with the, seems like it's in there a couple times. One time is with the ass. They have to go in and get the ass and bring it out that he rides in, right?
And they also bring a colt, and it's fun in a lot of medieval art. Jesus would be depicted as straddling both animals,
both
in an effort to harmonize those two texts. Now, for me, I would say, well, Jesus rode one of them, and the other one was used to cart Jesus's belongings that he undoubtedly was carrying with him. But
okay,
that is what we also call eisegesis. There's nothing in the text to support that notion.
So I guess the reason I was bringing that up is because it says I think, if I remember right, when it says the donkey's being brought, it says all this was done so that it might be fulfilled, that which was spoken by the prophets, right? So it seems like there obviously would be this possibility that if people needed him to be fulfilling prophecies, that could indeed happen. Or that, that the stories were applied to him later. So how would you say a deist should approach the question of Jesus?
So first of all, I appreciate that you acknowledge that he was a historical figure, or at least there was something there that coalesced into what Scripture has recorded as the person of Christ. And there is actually scant historical evidence of that. The best contemporary evidence we have is from writings of Josephus, who doesn't refer to Jesus directly, but does refer to his followers as the so-called Christians.
The so-called Christian.
Yeah. And I think he does expound upon that a little bit. It's been a while since I've read those passages from Josephus.
I've got it here, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, do you remember? Yeah. The complete works.
Hello, Josephus.
If you remember what chapter it would have been in, I could turn to it, but I'm sure that's probably.
Let's see. Let's see what our friend Google has to say. Is this a section that you'll cut?
Well, I mean, so when I've watched debates over this type of medium, one thing that does bother me is if one person is constantly on the computer, constantly Googling more self-reassuring things to talk about. But this obviously makes sense that you're excuse me.
Okay, so there are three passages in which Jesus makes reference to Jesus.
Okay.
The first one is in Book 20, Chapter 9. And this is all from Wikipedia, so consider the source.
Okay.
Josephus refers to the stoning of James, the brother of Jesus. And the James referred to in this passage is most likely the James to whom the Epistle of James has been attributed. So that's number one. Number two, Josephus refers to the imprisonment and death of John the Baptist by order of Herod. And so this does corroborate the biblical account,
right,
of John the Baptist's death.
Okay.
And then finally, in Book 18, Chapter 3, it describes the condemnation and crucifixion of Jesus at the hands of the Roman authorities. And let's see.
So which one of these do you want me to look up? Any of these and look at the language used, or what? So, in other words, if it's just parts where he says there was this guy named Jesus, there were followers, he was crucified. Again, I don't think any of that would be false.
Right. I'm looking. Okay, so there's a lot of debate about this too. So I'm kind of parsing through the Wikipedia entry.
Josephus was Jewish, right?
He was. That's correct. Okay, actually, and here is. I just realized Wikipedia has the actual text.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, a lot of these older texts are completely there. When I was researching General Sherman, I found that his entire memoir exists as a text file online.
Yeah. Okay, so about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared.
Okay, so if he must be describing what the Christians believe.
Yeah, so
because if he's a Jew, he obviously doesn't believe in reincarnation.
Yeah. And we could have a conversation about the difference between reincarnation and resurrection.
Right, resurrection. I should have said resurrection.
Yeah. Now, there were some Jews who did believe in resurrection.
Right, yeah, there's some resurrection in the Old Testament, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Let me see. Sorry. This is a fun little rabbit hole. I'm looking to see. Okay, so he was a first century Romano-Jewish historian, born in Jerusalem, to a father of priestly descent. So, we can read a couple of things into that. He likely would have had some influences from the Sadducees.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sadducees didn't really believe in an afterlife. Well,
there's not much in the Old Testament that discusses afterlife. Right?
That's correct. Yeah. You have a few of the prophets are taken into God's presence. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of discussion. Now, the Pharisees did believe in an afterlife. And so where you often find these sort of competing views play out is in commentary on Torah. So not necessarily in what we would call the Old Testament, mm-hmm. But in a lot of the writing that kind of accompanies it in the Jewish tradition. So to your original question, I do think Josephus has been identified as a relatively reputable source, and with this time period, you do have to take that with a grain of salt.
Right. But it would be worth pointing out that he remained an unconvinced source.
Yeah, as far as we know.
Because it seems like all the parts in there where people have referred me to it before, they'll say, look, here's where Josephus says that Jesus was resurrected. And I go and look, and he's really describing what the believers believe.
Right.
This is what they think.
So my educated guess on that would be that Josephus had access to some early manuscript, or had some friends in a Christian community that served as a source for him. Okay. He, of course, didn't cite anything.
Right. There was no peer review at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question then, like I said, Jesus existing, that he was crucified and everything, even that there was where he was placed was found empty later. I don't have any issues with any of that. Before I can look at that as a potential occurrence of what's being claimed, is that first I would have to have a good reason. Before someone says this, I'm going to convince you that this is God incarnated on earth.
Right.
What's the reason I would have to think that God would do that at all?
And this is where I am going to diverge from my own tradition. Because for me, Jesus, so I should probably say from the outset, I am Presbyterian. I am a member of the Presbyterian Church of the United States of America, which is the largest Presbyterian denomination in the U.S. And it is an eclectic denomination, and at least in my experience, is a big tent denomination. So there are people who are very conservative, people who are very liberal, and there is a spectrum of belief. Historically, the Presbyterian Church would claim that God intervened to provide a way to atone for our sins. That is not what I would claim. I would claim that Jesus is just one more part of the ongoing revelation of God's love for us. And that it was necessary. That's very not mainstream, I guess would be the way to put it.
So where's the when you talk about the forgiveness of sins, the God's love, does the need for that come from?
So I think a lot of that, this is probably worthy of multiple conversations. So a lot of that is rooted not in scripture, but in Platonic thought. And I've talked a little bit about dualism before, and its impact not only on Christianity and faith in general, but in the broader secular world. In Platonic thought, there is a lesser world in which we are existing, and a higher plane in which God and everything else that accompanies God exists. And in some ways, Platonic thought is a good fit for Christianity because you do have a storyline, and you do have a storyline in which things are sort of perfect. There is something that messes it up and sends us into this lesser world. Christians would call this the fall. When Adam and Eve took the fruit from the garden and introduced sin, and so you have this sort of perfection in the Garden of Eden, the fall, and then in Platonic thought there is something that brings us back. So for those who are trying to, and Paul is a great example of this. Paul, who is trying to sort of meld this Greek thought with what was happening with Jesus, and in an attempt to meld that, I think put forward this idea that Jesus was that answer to kind of swing us back up into that realm of perfection. There are a couple of issues with this.
I can think of a few.
Yeah. So first, at no point in Scripture does it claim that the Garden of Eden was perfect. There are all sorts of claims that God saw what God created and declared that it was good. But never once is it called perfect. And so from the outset, it requires a leap to make this sort of fit into a Platonic mind frame. So that's issue one.
Right. So I mean, the only way that I would ever get through Genesis, which I mean, I remember that this was brought up at the when I had the debate before, was one of the points that I had to make sure I made was that, I view myself as trying to find a path back to Christianity and what that path looks like. And there's things in the Old Testament and things in the New Testament, right, that I'll never believe as it's written, mainly for moral reasons. But when it comes to Genesis, there's too many scientific reasons. So the only way that I would ever make it through the Genesis story, Adam and the Garden of Eden and everything, is only if it's all metaphorical.
Yeah.
That's the only way that I'll ever make it through there. There's been too many discoveries that just completely obliterate the whole.
Well, and even within the text, now, and so first of all, there are actually two creation stories,
right,
in Genesis. Second of all,
I know there's two creations of man, but I never really could find a whole entire creation.
Yeah. So if you'll pardon me from
for Googling.
Yeah. Okay, so the first story is the 6 days of creation, which is a story that we know.
Right. Yeah, we know that one.
That is the entirety of Genesis 1. In Genesis 2, there is beginning at verse, verse 4. There is an entire second account. It does not contain all of the details that are in the first story. it contains a lot of details that are not in the first story. And there's a lot of really fascinating scholarship about this, that what Genesis is actually two separate accounts that have been melded together. And one is called the P source, and the other is called the J source. And those are the two primary source documents for the Genesis narrative.
Okay, so wait a minute. So you're saying in Genesis chapter 2,
that's correct,
the creation story happens again. So it starts, Genesis chapter 2 starts, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work. And then verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day. And then it goes into these are the generations of the heavens.
Yeah. But then in Genesis 1, you have a very clear account of the creation of plants and animals. But look at Genesis 2, verse 5. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being.
Oh, okay, I see how okay. Because I always was able to view it as sort of the creation of humans, and then the sort of creation of Adam and Eve. But I never really viewed it as two different creation stories.
And in a way, so in the first story, God kind of does all of the work and then creates humans. In the second story, God creates humans, and then there's almost this implication that the humans that God creates are part of the process of creation. And there's some really beautiful commentary to that effect. That's, it's not scriptural, but, there are some, what we would call apocryphal accounts.
Apocryphal. Yes. I'm very familiar with that idea.
Yeah. Of God bringing the animals to Adam and saying, "What shall we name this?"
Yeah, I heard Frank Turek on that one time. He was talking about Adam at the beginning of the day, and they're bringing these animals by, and he's like, "Elephant," and then another one comes by, "Mastodon," and then like aardvark, and then. It says that it fast forward to like 7 o'clock that evening, and he's like been over all tired, and he goes, "Cow."
Yeah. Dog.
Yeah. So already, what was he naming them in what language, and is there enough time in the day to name every? It has to be. If there's any truth to it, it has to be metaphorical.
Yeah.
But I don't even.
Well, and you can't. There's too much good scientific evidence that that would refute a literal reading of either of these accounts.
Right.
And
I don't think you can do it.
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways around that. One is to ignore the science.
Yeah. So me and my education, right? So that ain't gonna happen.
So, and there are a more limited subset of people who attempt to make the science work. They do so by using very particular examples.
But it's almost all the arguments that I've heard turn this all into metaphor.
Right, and that is probably the best way. There is some debate about the language used, especially what does a day mean in Genesis 1? Does it mean a literal day?
Well,
I would think not.
I've had a lot of people bring that up to me before. So you have this. It seems to be at the point where it says, and God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. At that point, you're pretty much dealing with 24 hours, I would think. But I know that there's still a lot of people who would insist, that it's talking about great long periods of time.
Yeah.
So the problem is, right, so scientifically the Earth, and then no matter how much time passes, then you create the sun. Scientifically there's too many solar systems that you can observe in the process of formation that that the star must exist first.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen any other way. So to create the Earth and then the sun. Well, let's not get into all that. So assuming there's scientific trouble there. So on the question, this sort of deism to theism step. So let's approach it from the baseline here. So I'm a deist, you're a theist. What's the first thing you would approach me with to try to convince me to consider deism?
I don't know that I would. And I'll tell you why. I don't know that it's necessary. Christianity is my chosen belief system. Now, I have chosen to continue to be engaged with it. The real reason I'm a Christian is because of where I was born. I was born in the United States in an area that was predominantly Christian to parents who grew up in the church. That makes the likelihood of me myself becoming a Christian much higher than someone who, say, was born in an area of the world where Islam is the predominant religion. And that, I mean, you were at one time active in a church as a professing believer.
Right. Baptist. So you might say it's a little easier to convert from being a Baptist than it would be from Presbyterian. The Baptist churches that I was attending when I was younger were, I don't know how familiar you are with Baptist belief, but
it depends on the church.
Yeah. So Ashe County, North Carolina, the General Baptist Church up there. I put in a little blog article I wrote a long time ago. I remember asking. It was in Sunday school, and I remember asking after Sunday school. We were talking about in Sunday school. The guy was referring to, and like I said, I have to look back and see where. Just for where it says, "Where two or three are gathered together in my name, I'll be in the midst of them and bless them." And I remember asking afterwards, why it didn't say one or more.
Huh.
I was like, why does this sort of exclude the individual? This discussion.
Yeah.
Does that mean if you're praying by yourself, no one hears you? I remember it was just sort of something that confused me. I was like, I don't know, I'd say I was 11 or 12. And the Sunday school teacher told me in so many words, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it said, don't ask foolish questions.
Huh.
And then he pointed me to a text, and I don't remember exactly which book it was in, but about not asking foolish questions as far as and I remember that was where my view of the church started to get a little weird.
Yeah.
For what was going on there. But it wasn't until like 2006.
Okay.
I was trying to be I felt a need to find out for myself what I believed here, because there was a part of me that was viewing this sort of the view of other people of other religions as just one person believing one thing and then telling another person who believes another thing that they're wrong. So I thought, well, I'm just going to read through the Bible and decide for myself what all is in there. And
Yeah.
I remember I was working at GE, and there was a few pastors that worked there. One was Primitive Baptist.
Okay.
Really interesting guy, Primitive
Yeah.
Baptist, young Earth creationist. So the discussions could get a little weird, but he was a great source, because he had, if you mentioned half a verse from anywhere in the Bible, he would tell you exactly which chapter it was from. And
Yeah.
it was really interesting that way. But I remember getting to several moral issues that were in there, several just logistical issues. I remember when I was working my way through the New Testament, one of my favorite stories had always been the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
That's always been one of my favorite stories in the New Testament. But I remember thinking, after I read through it, I thought, it's still one of my favorite stories. But who is recounting it here? Everyone was asleep. So are we assuming that after this conversation in the Garden of Gethsemane between Jesus and whoever all he is to have spoken to, that he just sort of went back to the disciples and said, you're not going to believe what just happened to me, and then described the whole thing to them. And then I came up with the same issue with the, like when Lucifer takes him away and tempts him in different areas. I'm like, none of the, even if you wanted to make the step of saying Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the authors.
Yeah.
They weren't there.
So there is some evidence, and I believe it is in Mark's account. And if you'll forgive me.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Mark 14, verse 51. This is after Jesus has been arrested. Mark records, a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. There's a lot of debate about who that young man was. My, I think, preferred interpretation is that it's Mark. Mark has written himself into the story.
Okay. That's... Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Regardless, there was someone present who escaped.
And this, but so,
and presumably escaped to tell what happened.
Wait, okay, so let's... So, Jesus at Gethsemane cometh the third time. So,
do you have your Bible?
Yeah. I have, well,
Okay.
So this is the one I usually use for these discussions. It's the it's the Hebrew Greek translation. Yeah. So it's generally helps because it has these a lot of the language here. If it's something weird, it puts a number after it and it says this is the meaning of that word.
Yeah.
So it has,
there's a website that has called Blue Letter Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's similar. It's got it's got all of the Greek and the Hebrew, and then several translations.
So in chapter 14 there, it says, in verse 40, it says, and when he returned, he found them asleep again, and cometh the third time. See, now if your rested is enough, the hours, and so on and so forth. So when he comes back, he sort of wakes them all up the third time. So you're saying when it says he found them asleep again, he's saying that all of them were asleep but the naked man with linen. The linen covering his body.
Now let me make sure I'm seeing the same thing.
On verse 40.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I think at that point, all of them would have been awake.
All of them would have been awake, even though it says they're asleep?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Jesus came and woke them up. He said to them,
everybody but the one guy with the linen. Because
yeah,
that guy would have had to have been awake.
And Jesus says, "Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." 42.
Right.
And then Judas comes, and then they all flee in verse 50.
Yeah. And then it's 51, and there followed him a certain young man having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him. So they tried to capture him. So when it says he returned and they were all still asleep, the idea is they were all still asleep but that guy.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So you could imagine a little bit of unconvincedness about that situation, right? So
yeah. And we are engaging in eisegesis, not exegesis.
Right.
Exegesis, you draw things out of the text. Eisegesis, you read things into the text.
So the eisegesis part is you're reading into you're trying to put in there that
right.
Mark was there. And,
right.
Okay.
And it can be a helpful tool. It can also be a dangerous tool.
Okay, so that's a perfect time to talk about scriptural inerrancy. So
yeah,
that was the very next topic we were on. So where do you view the Bible at as far as the inerrancy argument? What is the Bible?
So for me, the Bible is a sacred library of texts that record how humanity has interacted with the divine through an extended period of history. Not all scripture is the same. And I don't think it's inerrant. At least not in the form that we have it today. There are several examples, and these have come up in the discussion group a few times. I don't know that we necessarily need to rehash that unless you want
examples
to. Mistakes or errors within the text.
Okay.
Yeah. And
you don't see an issue with there being mistakes and errors?
I don't. For me, I think it makes it more authentic.
Okay. So you would be in the camp that says if you've got 4 people recounting the same event, for you it adds credibility if they don't agree.
Right. If you get 4 eyewitnesses to the same event in a murder trial, you're going to get 4 very different stories for what happened.
And that does. I would add though, in that situation, that does not help the case. That may
Correct.
indeed be the case. That they don't agree, but that in no way helps the prosecution.
Correct. It doesn't. But we're not I'm not the prosecution here.
Right. No. Okay. So I guess when you said murder case, I'm imagining if you've got 4 people recounting that a person is guilty.
If you have 4 people retelling any story, they are going to tell it with their own interpretation,
right,
of what happened.
Okay, so the little things, like I had a discussion not long ago about that all 4 gospels seem to describe something different on the sign above Jesus' head. The little stuff like that you don't really think matters.
No, I don't. I think we can generally agree that Jesus was baptized. There does seem to be agreement within the text that happened, and that something happened afterwards. Some of the texts seem to imply that that only Jesus was aware of the voice and the dove coming down. Some of the texts imply that everybody was aware. But there's general agreement that the event occurred. And for me, that's enough.
Okay, so you're talking about the voice of God is different.
Yeah, and there are some differences. And I think in one, God says, "This is my beloved, and whom I am well pleased." There's one that says, "This is my son, listen to him," or something like that. I don't have the text in front of me. But there are, I mean, you can look at those accounts, and there are very specific differences, not only in the Greek, but also in the way that they're translated into English.
So, so how about the virgin birth then? Because
for me, I think our idea of the virgin birth is a Western creation, and the word that is used can mean virgin. It can also mean a young woman.
Alma, right?
Yeah,
the word that was used, Alma.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. I think that is
but that was
Western
in the prophecy, right? That was in the prophecy used the word Alma, and
right,
which was in Hebrew. But then they also had the word. I have no idea if I'm saying it right, but it's like Bethula. I don't know how that's pronounced, like Bethula, which was the Hebrew word at the time, which meant virgin.
All right, now we're gonna have to look it up.
Right. So the reason that I always, while you're looking that up, so the reason that I always had a little bit of trouble with the virgin birth was that even if you view the Gospels as being written by their namesake, which I always had a lot of trouble with anyway, even if you view them as being written by them, the virgin birth is at best hearsay. Because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wouldn't have been there. And so they would have been relying on whoever was there at the time to tell them. And then they are recounting it here. So it's doubled hearsay. So, excuse me. It was something I always had trouble with. So,
yeah.
But then even, like I said, the prophecy, when I looked into it, doesn't seem to require that he is a virgin birth. It just seems to be sort of a miracle that was needed later. So are you looking up where that is at now?
Yeah, so Isaiah 7:14. And let's look it up in Blue Letter Bible and actually look at the word in Hebrew. Okay, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. That's the English translation. The word used is Alma. 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 The word us And it can mean a virgin, a young woman of marriageable age, or a maid or newly married.
Right. So, yeah, so that seems like the most applicable would be the last one. A newly married woman who conceive it, which makes it somewhat hardly remarkable, you know. So
Right.
why would he even include it if that was the intent? Then there's
Because
isn't there the problem?
I think in the Jewish conception of who the Messiah is and how the Messiah comes to be, I think we have to abandon this idea that virginity is so central to the miracle of who Christ is.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly seems like it's a fairly human or even more specifically a male infatuation with virginity.
Yes.
So that's the other thing we were talking about just for a minute. When we're sort of like talking about these broad concepts in the New Testament, like who was there to see the virgin birth, whether or not that's important.
Yeah.
What I was referring to earlier when Jesus is taken away and is tempted in different areas, do you think someone was there to see that, or was that an assumption that was made later, or did Jesus tell that to them while he was?
I don't know that I've ever really thought about it.
Because I mean, you have to assume nobody else was there.
Right. In order for it to be recorded.
Well, somebody has to be there for it to be recorded.
Right. I would just an off-the-cuff answer would probably say that Christ told them what transpired.
What wouldn't? So it seems like there's a fairly specific recounting of the things that he told them, because the next time he would have been able to tell them probably was after the resurrection, right? And it seems like the conversations that were had afterwards are fairly detailed, you know, as far as, you know.
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's important to note these texts were not written down until after the resurrection.
Yes, that we must be sure of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The texts in their entirety were not written until after the resurrection.
And I would go so far as to say until a good time after the resurrection.
The earliest date that we have for Mark's gospel is around 60.
Right. That's a good while. And so that brings up another point. So I've tried to have this conversation with people before, and I don't think they understand what I'm trying to say. So the descriptions of the Last Supper, there's two different accounts of how Judas is implicated in the event. One is that he was, you know, somebody's going to betray me, and everybody's like, oh, who is it? And everybody starts saying, is it me? Is it me? Is it? And then it gets to Jesus, or it gets to Judas, and Judas says, is it me? And he says, thou hast said. Obviously, the conversation doesn't go on from there. They don't even get through all 12 disciples, so everyone understands what's just been said. And the other account has, is it John? I think leans over and says, who is it that will betray you? And he says, the person that I give this bread to is going to do it. And he like dips the bread and he hands it to Judas. He's like, there he is, you know. So some people have suggested there was more than one Last Supper, which I don't. The problem with that is that not one of the Gospels say there was more than one Last Supper.
Right.
So in order for that to be true, one of them has to at least say there was two, last
And
suppers, right?
I would say that there was only one.
Right. So,
So a real quick synopsis of the formation of the Gospels. Mark is traditionally viewed as earliest, closely followed by Matthew and Luke. And we can date Matthew a little earlier than Luke because of some of the context in those texts. Matthew and Luke both borrow very heavily from Mark. Between Matthew and Luke, Mark is contained almost in its entirety in those two Gospels. There is a second source that Matthew and Luke had access to that Mark did not have access to, or at least didn't feel it was necessary to record. And then Matthew and Luke both have their own sources for material that is unique to those Gospels. So, but taken all together, those three are what we call the synoptic Gospels, because they are generally in agreement with one another. John developed completely differently. And so there are a lot of differences between John and the other three. For example, at the Last Supper, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospel, Jesus instituted the Last Supper, which is memorialized when churches celebrate communion. In John's Gospel, Jesus does not do any of that. Jesus washes their feet.
Right, yeah. So I guess when it comes to everybody liking to just sort of fit all the Gospels together and saying, well, this must have happened first, and then this must have happened, and then this must have happened. One of the things that I've always had trouble with is the implication of Judas. Is it, one of them says that he's implicated and he immediately leaves.
Right.
And
another one says he takes the bread.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of them, since it says he immediately leaves, it has to have been last. But that's the one that would have been after the one that everyone was told, there thou hast said it. Obviously it's Judas, So when it comes to stuff like that, how do you like to argue your way through it? Do you sort of just assume they all fit together, or do you look at it more of a metaphorically? Maybe they're trying to make a different point there. Because
yeah, I mean, I think that's the camp that I would fall in. And I would need to look at each one, and maybe it'd be good to have a follow-up conversation about this too.
About the Last Supper.
Yeah. And actually, there have been a few topics that we could do follow-up conversations on.
Okay.
I would think. So it might be good to have a more focused conversation on that particular text.
Okay. Well, let's skip forward out of that then.
Yeah. Well, just sort of generally speaking, I would say that each of the gospel authors has a particular bent, or a particular point of view that sort of pervades their writing. And so Matthew may have been written with the intent of reaching the Pharisees.
Oh yeah. So I've heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah.
One was written for the Greeks, or one was written for the Gentiles.
Yeah. Luke has a particular pays a lot of attention and particular care to the poor and the outcast and the downtrodden, and that's sort of prevalent throughout the gospel.
Right.
Mark, one of the hallmarks of Mark is almost every paragraph begins with the words in Greek, and suddenly, Everything is happening. Yeah. Everything is happening with this sort of feeling of immediacy, that it's happening right now.
Right.
So, and everything's a surprise.
Everything's a surprise. Okay, so
Yeah.
So then the question is, if it can be something as different as that, like, so if someone says that he handed the piece of bread to Judas and he took it, or someone says that he said, everyone's asking, was it me, was it me, and then when he gets to Judas, he says, thou hast said it. The metaphorical idea can't be taken real far, because that seems to be describing a fairly literal situation, right? So if you get to the point where you say, well, the different authors of the Gospels are just sort of telling the story their way, how they want. So what could you conclude other than that there was a man named Jesus and that he was crucified?
I think you could conclude that some sort of final gathering took place.
You're talking about the Last Supper thing, yeah. Some sort of gathering.
Right. Some final gathering took place in which Judas was present. This gathering may or may not have included foot washing.
So we might as well just leave that out of the gathering.
Right.
If it's a may or may not.
No. So the thought on that is, it was typical for people as they entered houses to have their feet washed. It was typical for a servant to do that.
Right. So as far as importance to the story,
Jesus is acting in the role of a servant. And it would have happened before the meal. So for those who want to sort of harmonize those accounts, the foot washing took place first, and then they had a meal, and John didn't feel it was necessary to record the meal.
Right. Even though that would have been when Judas was dead. It seems like that, as far as the Last Supper goes, is like the second most important part.
Yeah.
So the most important part is, sort of do this in memory of me, But then the second most important would be, this is where
it's certainly probably, with the exception of the act of the crucifixion, it's certainly probably the most important part in terms of how it shaped Christian tradition and worship ever since. Throughout most of history, anytime Christians gathered, they recreated this meal.
Right.
Now, as you know, in the Presbyterian Church in Marion and in other Presbyterian churches, it doesn't happen every time we gather.
Right. Yeah. Some places do it every meeting.
Right.
It seems like that would get expensive.
Yeah. So you're right that it's a profound moment. And I think for me, and this is where I differ from probably a lot of people that you've interacted with. For me, my faith is not dependent on the text agreeing with itself and being inerrant.
Right.
It's not.
I just like to know the different ways people look at it, because I've encountered the full spectrum, and the literalists are the ones that are the most difficult. People that say that it's literally accurate in every way,
Yeah.
I guess that would be my observation, is that sort of the only thing you could really count on would be only the common parts of the stories, if you combine them all together. So there would be, and like I said, I have trouble when something must by necessity be hearsay. So one of those is the virgin birth. There's no way around it. It's hearsay by at least 2 terms. Right. So that I have a lot of trouble with, because it's not unthinkable that a rumor begins. And then there's all kinds of trouble. There's not a whole lot of agreement in what happens after the virgin birth, because there's this idea that they went to Egypt, and then there's the idea that they went to Jerusalem, and you sort of have to, that what you were talking about, you have to sort of add stuff in there and assume that there's something
Right.
that's not written that happened,
Right.
which is something.
There's a lot that happened that isn't written.
Right. Yeah. So to me, that's the
yeah.
point at which, when you start putting a lot of stuff that's the point at which somebody really is writing their own Bible. This is what I feel
Right.
happened in this space between the time that this happened and this. I'm going to say all this happened based on nothing. We had that conversation before about the genealogies, right? The two different genealogies of Jesus, both literally claim two different things. But people assume one is actually just referring to something else that it doesn't say it's referring to. So at that point, it seems like it ventures into the area of writing their own Bible. Saying, this is what I want it to be. Okay, so let's without spending too much time there. So let's go on to, I think the next two are kind of combined, the Big C versus Little C and the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just walk through the Apostles' Creed right quick.
Okay.
I'll tell you the parts that confuse me, and we can discuss it, because the Presbyterian Church is the only one that I've ever been to that actually recites the Apostles' Creed. I think I may have gone to the Catholic Church. It's either Catholic or Lutheran. There's not a lot of difference. It was in West Jefferson. I think it might have been Catholic.
Yeah.
I think I was dating a girl that went there, and I went there with her one time. I don't remember. I'm sure they probably recited it, but I don't remember.
Yeah. They would have.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I was probably distracted at the time.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, your confusion comes mainly in that final third of the creed, beginning with, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins. Right.
Yeah. So the rest of it seems to be fairly fundamental to Christian belief.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't surprise me at all. The Apostles' Creed forming and being written in the Catholic Church, some of this all makes sense. So when it says, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, so how would you quickly describe that statement? And so, because I assume you don't believe that the Pope is a vicar of Christ on earth.
I'm open to be convinced on that point, but
really, wow,
yeah. But that is, when I say I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, I am not talking about the Roman Catholic Church. I am talking about the word Catholic is an old word that refers to the entirety of the church. So when I say the Holy Catholic Church, I say I believe in the holy entirety of the church. That includes Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, Episcopalians, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox.
Okay,
Coptic,
so the Catholic Church would disagree with you, right?
I think they would. Well, I don't know. That would be an interesting conversation. Let's get a Catholic priest on the next time we do this.
So here's the question then. If because it seems to me that the idea of using it as this sort of catch-all term may be more driven by a resistance to changing the Apostles' Creed instead of a need to leave it in there. So in other words, if the Apostles' Creed is written for the Catholic Church, in the Catholic Church, and you have the separation of the Catholic Church into Protestant denominations. And it seems like that using a sort of catch-all, instead of changing "I believe in the Holy Catholic Church" to "I believe in the Church," in the entire, I believe in the in the total church.
Yeah, I do think you have to consider the intent of those who put the creed together. When the creed was written, there was no delineation. The
Right.
church was united. And so for them, it was a further way of emphasizing the unity of the church.
No, so you don't believe that there was, because
I don't think at the time that the Apostles' Creed was created, Christians who would have even said that the Pope was the vicar of Christ, which they would not have said at that time, would not have identified themselves as Catholic. That the Catholic Church did not become Catholic until the Great Schism in the 1087, I think, when there was a delineation between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox. And then that division became even further when during the Reformation 500 years later.
right.
So for me, when I say the Holy Catholic Church, I am referring to the entirety of the church. I am also cognizant of and honoring the intention of the authors that this is to express the unity of the whole church. And there are, and the Apostles' Creed is a good summation of the things which the whole church agrees upon. There are
the whole church.
There are churches who disagree.
Yeah. So when you say the whole church, I guess that be more specific. What do you mean when you say the whole church?
Well, how do I be more specific than the whole church?
Well, so you said the whole church agrees on it, and then you said there are some that don't. So what do you mean by the whole church?
So I would mean Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, those in the Reformed tradition, Episcopalians, Baptists even.
Well, I know Baptists that would not recite the Apostles' Creed.
And would that language be the only reason why, or would there be other points that they would take issue with?
Okay, so let's go to the next one. The communion of saints. So we had spoke about that before. It seems to be a very central idea that needs to be part of the Catholic Church. There has to be this communion. That's very central to their style, their practice is the communion of saints. Now, you had mentioned before that maybe it has to do with a verse. So what is that rooted in for you?
Yeah, and I'm gonna pull up the verse real quick, because I don't have the Bible memorized.
That makes two of us.
Okay. Where is the verse? Sorry about this.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, that's not helpful. All right. Wikipedia is failing me. Okay. So there is, I want to say it's in Thessalonians, and for some reason it's not coming up. Give me just a second.
Okay.
No, it's in Hebrews. Okay. Okay, so this is how I've always thought of being saying I believe in the communion of the saints. Hebrews 12, starting with verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. For me, the great cloud of witnesses is that communion of the saints, and in the Reformed tradition, we don't have particular saints, but would say that those who have glorified God in their life on earth, who have passed on, that they are, one, part of this great cloud of witnesses, that they are part of the communion of the saints. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that.
Okay, so here's the question. I guess it seems to me a very similar situation to before. If this were the Apostles' Creed applying to the Catholic faith, big C, Catholic faith, it seems like this would need to be part of the creed. This would need to be part of their belief. They have saints. This is needed to be in there. So if for you it's that you've got this one verse that can kind of explain the communion of saints thing, why, at what point do you say that something is important enough that it has to be in the creed, like the thing that defines your faith? In other words, why would you not add, everything else? Also, I don't know, I'm trying to think of other examples, but, also believe that Balaam's ass spoke. You also believe all that, at some point you have to say, okay, what are the fundamentals? What are the things that really define it? Because to me, like I said,
this is actually a somewhat interesting digression that won't take long. When Presbyterians are ordained to the office of minister of word and sacrament, one of the ordination vows that I take is to uphold the essential tenets of the church.
And is one of those essential tenets the communion of saints?
Those essential tenets have never been defined.
Okay. So to me, it seems like this. If you really have narrowed it down to this one verse that, like I said, for me doesn't seem to be real specifically applicable. Like you can squint your eyes and look at it and say, oh, kind of. It seems like then, very similar to what I was saying before, that this verse might be an excuse to leave it in the creed rather than a reason to include it.
Okay.
Because, what about the teachings of the New Testament say you must also believe in the communion of saints?
Yeah.
The rest of it makes sense. That there's plenty of stuff there where Paul is saying, you have to believe in the resurrection, you have to believe in, all this kind of stuff. But there's nothing specifically that says, and the communion of saints you have to believe in. The only time that makes sense to me is with the Catholic Church.
Yeah. So I do think that it depends on how you define saints. And so, for me, I am more open to the idea of individual saints than most Protestants are. I do wear a saint medallion that a friend gave to me when I graduated from high school. Now, part of that was it was deeply meaningful to me to have received it from my friend.
Yeah.
But there's also a part of me. It's a Saint Christopher medallion, who is the patron saint of travelers.
Right.
There's a part of me that wants to feel like there is something looking after me when I travel.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but, and I digress a little bit there. I do think that, again, when the creed was written, the process of canonizing saints was not codified. The process wasn't set in stone.
But there were saints before the Apostles' Creed was written.
People who
I'm fairly positive of that.
Right. There are people who are now referred to individually as saints that were not referred to as saints in their own time.
Right. Sure. So
right.
I guess what I'm saying is when the Apostles' Creed was written, it's been a while since I looked it up, but it seems like one of the questions I had was, did they have saints at the time? And it seems like they certainly did have saints, like we would view them in the Catholic Church today.
I see, and I would push back against that, because I don't think at that point you had people who were called saints. But I don't think it meant the same as for us to talk about, say, like Saint Nicholas.
So when the Apostles' Creed was written, do you think that it was referring to this verse in Hebrews, or do you think that it was referring to the saints in the Catholic Church?
I think it was informed by that verse in Hebrews. And I also think that at the time that it was written, the way that those early leaders of the church conceptualized saints is similar to how Protestants have viewed saints.
Which, how would you briefly summarize how Protestants have viewed saints?
That they, I mean, I can think of people that I have called saints of the church. People who had a lasting and meaningful impact on my life and on my faith. So
is believing there's a communion of those people essential to the faith?
I think so, because I think that it at least in some way implies that there is some life beyond this one, which is essential.
So you don't think the part about Jesus ascending to heaven is an affirmation of life beyond this one?
I do. But both can be affirmations of that. And so yes, that Jesus rose again and ascended into heaven, that is affirmation. There is no affirmation there that the people who have had such a meaningful impact on my life are there too. But when I say I believe in the communion of the saints, that is affirmation. Does that make sense?
For me, it's a little bit of a stretch, but
Okay,
I think
that's fair.
I think I see what you're saying. So okay, I think I see what you're saying. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to something you said there for a minute. I said I was asking if you thought the Pope was the vicar of Christ on earth, and you said you were open to that.
Yeah.
I was not at all expecting that. So, what do you mean by you're open to that?
So I am far more comfortable with, and I should say, people within my tradition have fought wars over this. Like people have literally died,
Right.
over this idea, and so for me to say that is, I think, in some ways shocking considering my background. But I am open to the idea of the papacy as a unifying force of the church. And there is something that has always been really appealing to me about the idea of the episcopacy, the having bishops, and it's something that Presbyterians don't have, at least not in any I guess official capacity.
So what's because I guess historically speaking, the setup of the Catholic Church, without being too vulgar, has not been optimal. The hierarchy has resulted in some fairly significant issues.
Yes.
For the Catholic Church. So I guess that's sort of the believing in the communion of saints makes so much sense for the Catholic Church, because there's this idea that there's a hierarchy of people and they know more than you do. They know what's best for you, and that's why it's sort of like it's in the Apostles' Creed. It's like making someone say, "And I believe that you can tell me what to think." Because there's people out there that, and it's resulted in some trouble.
For me, it's not so much that, as it is the fact that, for example, when a bishop is consecrated as a bishop, there are always three other bishops who participate, at least three other bishops who participate. And that line allegedly stretches all the way back to the apostles. That the apostles consecrated bishops, those bishops then consecrated more bishops. And that you can trace that lineage, for lack of a better term.
So just the tradition appeals to you?
Yeah, that appeals to me. Now, I am fully cognizant and recognize the dangers and abuses in that system. And I think that there ought to be appropriate checks and balances. I don't believe that that receiving that consecration makes anyone any more holy, or makes them any more able to interpret the ongoing revelation of God's love for us.
But doesn't the the idea that there's a, because the excuse me, the Pope is in the Catholic Church. If you're open to the Vicar of Christ thing, the Pope in the Catholic Church is infallible.
That is a relatively modern invention.
The infallibility of the Pope.
Yeah, that was not that idea wasn't put forward until the late 1800s, and it was in response to a lot of things happening in the world at the time. But that's a relatively new thing, and I don't accept that.
So you don't accept the infallibility part,
right?
So what about
just as I don't accept the infallibility of Scripture,
right? So when you say that you're open to the idea of someone being the Vicar of Christ on earth, what are you saying you're open to?
I'm saying I am intrigued by the idea of the tradition, and I am intrigued by the possibility of the visible unity of the church.
Okay, so that doesn't seem to be specifically discussing the Pope.
Yeah, so I guess an ancillary discussion about that would be that somebody has to head that up.
Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. So
yeah.
Okay. But so I can kind of relate to what you're saying here. So you know, being a Freemason, there was some sense of I don't know if pride is the right word, but when you go back to sort of do a catechism as you're moving through the degrees of Freemasonry, there is this really nice feeling to have, knowing that you're reciting a catechism that was also recited by George Washington,
right,
or Benjamin Franklin, or even as Harry Truman, right? There's just this really interesting idea that you're reciting something word for word that they recited word for word. So I could see the draw of the tradition and the ritual. I don't know if ritual is the right word, but the draw of that kind of stuff to the Catholic Church. So
yeah.
Okay, so there's one more thing I wanted to go over, because I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and I've never really brought it up with you, and this might just be something where we decide, that there's another conversation topic.
Okay.
When it comes to throughout the course of reading the Bible, the Old Testament, mainly the Old Testament, right? Do you have stories that you read in there, the way that they're written, that cause moral issues with you?
Yeah. Yeah, and this might be a better topic to cover individually. But just off the top of my head, I do have issues with the Exodus narrative. And particularly that God, according to the text, smites all of the firstborn of the Egyptians. Or smites all of the firstborn of the houses that were not marked with lamb's blood.
Right.
I have issues squaring that with who I believe and know God to be.
So,
because those people are also God's children. And so for me, I have trouble accepting that is an account of what actually happened. I think it may be the account of how the writer or author of the text perceived how things happened.
Yeah, see, that's the view that I take on the Old Testament entirely. is that it's just how somebody perceived those things happening. Right. So whenever it says, and God said to this person, I'm like, no, that's just what everybody assumes he said. Or that's just what the guy claimed was said to him later.
Right. It's what the high priest said God told him to say, or,
Right.
Whatever. Yeah.
So there was, for me, that was one of the big breaking points of the inerrancy argument, or the moral discussion of the Bible, is that there's a common thread through the Old Testament of the sins of the father. Mm-hmm. And which is something at face value is clearly problematic, right? Holding a child responsible for the sins of its father somehow. And when I sort of observed that throughout the Old Testament, then I sort of backed up and thought, well, how broad can that be applied? If I were to say to you, does it make sense to punish or to hold a child guilty of something that its father or grandfather or whatever that is, of a crime committed by them? So how would you
I don't think it's right. I don't think it's what God would require. I think it's what we require.
So how problematic is that to the idea of original sin?
So, and again, this is probably another individual topic.
Right.
It is very problematic for the idea of original sin if you believe in original sin.
Okay. Or believe in original sin as it's described.
Right. If you believe that sin is, for all intents and purposes, a sexually transmitted disease, then yes, that is highly problematic.
So I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and I said, do you believe that a child could be made to suffer and die for the sins of another person? I didn't say his father or anything. Do you think that's a moral act? And the person I was discussing it with said, well, it would be immoral if we did it. But God could do it if he wanted. And for me, that's a huge issue. I have trouble with that. It sort of opens up a huge can of worms as far as what you believe God can or would do. So for me, that sort of obliterated a lot of the Old Testament and the relevance any of it had. It sort of, to me, means most of it is just people trying to say this is what they think happened, this is what they think God did. This, they don't really,
or using it to justify what they did.
Yeah. So there was an interesting verse, and I thought it might have come up in the debate that I had, because we delve real deep into this topic, because that's the main moral issue I have, is this sort of sins of the father trend through the Old Testament.
Right.
And one of them is God tells these people, it says, when you arrive at this city and you're getting ready to kill them all, they're going to say, why are you doing this? We've done nothing wrong. We've done nothing to you. Why are you doing? And then God said, well, you need to tell them that it's because of what their fathers did. And to me, that sort of crystallized for me the excuse to have that narrative, because it means that you can hold a people guilty of a crime that they can't be exonerated from. That you can approach a city and be planning on committing genocide in this town, and you can hold them guilty of something they have no knowledge of. So maybe that's we could look at doing that as a topic too. So just to wrap things up, so we got the Last Supper conversation. To discuss what happened at the Last Supper. Then we've got the I don't know if it'd make a whole, but the sins of the father conversation. And then, what were the other ones we were?
Um,
There was a few other ones we said it'd probably be best left to a. Was it just moral
yeah,
issues in general?
I think so. Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, we can always add things later too.
Right. So what do you think?
Yeah, this was fun.
It was fun? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'll be happy to do it again.
so
I'm looking forward to. I imagine that there will be conversation.
well, I hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
there was several times with the group there on Facebook that I thought, I probably should just go ahead and delete it because I mean, unless I make a post and specifically tag people and say talk, you know,
Yeah.
most of the time it's really hard to get discussions started.
Yeah.
And because what I would like to happen is more conversations like this happen and not always have me in them.
Right. Right.
Because that seems to be what has to be done right now. Is that the one that has to be pushing it around? So hopefully that'll start some more conversations, and I would like to. I know I've said it before, but I would really like to see a really good conversation between someone who was the sort of the free will side and the predestination side. That was the only topic we didn't get to, was predestination.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that conversation.
That might actually be a good separate topic as well.
Is predestination?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think was the most interesting part of the conversation?
I think our earlier conversation about deism versus theism was pretty good.
Do you think it deserves to be elaborated on?
Yeah. And I'll be honest. I didn't read as much as I probably should have. I probably need to read some Thomas Paine.
Yeah. So the Age of Reason is mostly. Excuse me. He says at the beginning of it, he says, "I will, in the course of this work, proclaim what I believe as well as what I do not believe." And he talks about so a big part of it is just a critique of the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? So the parts about deism are mainly in part one, and mainly he says, that deism is a sort of pure belief in one God and no more. So he has his own little creed that he put together at the very beginning of it. So that's a good one. A lot of people would confuse. So Thomas Jefferson he never claimed to be a deist, though a lot of people just assume that he was.
Yeah.
But, his discussion of Christianity is something that informs a lot of people on deism. But I don't, mainly it's once you read through the Age of Reason, you can sort of get the idea that that's the thinking process that led to deism.
Yeah.
Because everything's broken down, and there's a really interesting part which I'd like to get your opinion on, is the idea that the Adam and Eve story is one of Lucifer defeating God. That God put together this whole system and it was thwarted. Lucifer just said, "I'm just going to go tell him to eat the apple," and what now? So, I mean, it's like it's almost like saying that the I don't remember the exact language he used, but basically saying that God was overthrown by a talking snake. So I'm not, not like gods have made all these plans. This is what we're going to do, and then so it's that sort of like general broad view of things that leads a lot of times to deism. Sort of like overall, and the sins of the father issue results in a lot of problems with original sin. So that's what it does. A lot of affects anyway Christianity on several levels. But
yeah.
if you get a chance to watch the debate that we had, because there's a lot of things that we discussed that I would like to ask you about, and since I knew you hadn't watched it, I didn't want to ask about it, but hopefully we can get some more direct, essentially mini debates going on in this type setting, like another live setting where there's actually a debate that goes on.
Yeah, and the Zoom is actually a pretty good resource for that, and it's harder to tell when you only have two people, but the speaker view that we've been using, when you have, like, say you have 6 people, they're displayed in like Brady Bunch.
Okay, so you just get more and more blocks.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, a Brady Bunch style. That would be interesting.
Yeah, so and it does. It gets interesting. So it would be fun to have maybe more than one, or maybe more than 2 of us. Although that would limit us to 40 minutes per discussion.
Well, and you could have a moderator.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So it's only with 2 people that there's no time limit?
That's correct. Yeah, 3 or more.
Okay.
When 3 or more are gathered, it's limited to 40 minutes.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, I'm gonna I'll try to save this video and upload it.
Okay.
And probably upload it tomorrow. I find like if you upload stuff during the peak hour of when people are online, like around 5:30 or 6, it gets noticed the most. So I'll save this and try to upload it tomorrow. I may try to crop out, like right now I think I'm recording my taskbar. Like I'll try to crop everything down. But so hopefully that'll, and we'll figure out when to have the next discussion on what topic.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody just wants to join in, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Were there? I meant to look. Were there any comments on your post?
Oh yeah, I should have checked that. Yeah. Are you on there?
I'm looking now. Adam responded with a wow.
A wow. Okay. So, but there was no comment, any specific question or anything?
Yeah. No comment.
Okay.
So, okay. All right, man. I gotta get to bed.
All right. Well, this was fun. We'll do it again. Hopefully, would weekend be better?
Yeah, generally speaking. Well, Sundays or Mondays are my days off right now. So
would it be like Sunday night be the best, since you don't have to?
Yeah. And I think it depends on the week too. So
okay.
But I'm sure we can find a time.
Okay. Cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was good to see you.
You too.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.